I drove 600 miles because Bob Fleur's daughter said he was adjusting. That was the word she used, adjusting. By the time I reached his room, I had counted 4 things a man like Bob Fleur would never have allowed if he were still being treated like himself. His hearing aids, dead, in a drawer. His water cup placed where his bad shoulder could not reach it. His call button tied behind the bed rail like it had bitten somebody, and the look he gave me when I walked in. Not relief. Warning. "Mike," Bob whispered. "Don't make trouble." That was when I knew trouble had already moved in. The drive to Amarillo had taken me across more sky than a man ought to see in one day. Bonnie rode in her little travel bed behind the passenger seat, offended by every cattle guard. Lucy stayed closer to me, chin on the console, watching the road the way Carol used to watch weather. Bob Fleur and I had known each other since we were boys, with too much confidence and not enough sense. Amarillo High, shop class, Friday lights, a 1957 pickup that never ran right until Bob found a vacuum leak everybody else had missed. He was the sort of kid who would give you his last socket and then call you an idiot for losing your own. We had not lived in the same town for decades, but some friendships do not need daily watering. Bob called me every Christmas Eve. I called him every April 15 because the man had once mailed his taxes without signing them and blamed the federal government for being picky. When Dana called and said he had moved into Prairie Vista Senior Living, I asked the questions you ask when you are old enough to know brochures are written by people who do not sleep in the rooms. Is he eating? They're monitoring that. Is he getting outside? They have activities. Does he sound like Bob? There was a pause then. He's adjusting, Mike. I have learned to respect pauses. Prairie Vista sat on the edge of Amarillo behind a low stone sign, 2 flags, and landscaping trimmed so tightly it looked nervous. The building was tan stucco and big windows, cheerful in the way places are cheerful when someone has been paid to decide where the chairs go. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner over something older. A woman at the front desk smiled at Bonnie and Lucy and told me pets were welcome in designated areas. I told her the dogs had not asked for designation. She did not know what to do with that, which was fair. Most people do not. Bob was in room 118. The first thing I noticed was the door. Not because anything was wrong with it, because there was nothing of Bob on it. No ball cap. No picture. No little sign from a grandchild. Just a plastic nameplate that said Robert Fleur in a font that looked like it had never raised its voice. Bob hated Robert. He said Robert was what banks called him when they wanted money and what teachers called him when he had earned it. I knocked anyway. "Come in," he said. The voice was Bob's and not Bob's. He was sitting in a recliner near the window, wearing a facility sweatshirt I had never seen before. His beard was gray stubble along his jaw. His hair had been combed by someone who had finished the task, but not the thought. One of his slippers was turned sideways under the chair, just far enough away that reaching for it would cost him. He smiled when he saw me. Then the smile disappeared into that warning look. Bonnie trotted in first, tail up, certain that all rooms improved when she entered them. Lucy stopped at the threshold and looked around. Lucy has never been dramatic. She simply believes unease should be recorded. "Bob," I said. "Look at you," he said. "Still ugly. You should see me in better light." That got half a laugh out of him. The other half stayed somewhere behind his eyes. I set my bag down and looked without looking like I was looking. That is one of the few skills age improves. Young men stare. Old men inventory. Hearing aid case on the dresser. Open. Batteries dead. Water cup on the rolling table across the bed, maybe 30 inches from Bob's good hand, 42 from the bad shoulder. Too far either way once you saw how he guarded his right side. Call button cord, looped behind the bed rail and clipped to the wall. Bed alarm pad switched off at the wall. Western shirts absent from the closet. Activity calendar on the wall, full of cheerful boxes, none marked with Bob's name. "You been outside?" I asked. Bob looked at the window. "They have a courtyard." That was not an answer. I asked if you had been outside. He swallowed. I don't want to be difficult. There it was. The first thief in a place like that is not always money. Sometimes it is the right to be inconvenient. I walked to the dresser and picked up the hearing aid case. These need batteries? Bob shrugged with the shoulder that still worked. They said I keep misplacing them. Do you? Sometimes. These are in the case. He looked down at Bonnie, who had placed her chin on his slipper as if claiming jurisdiction. Mike, he said softly, don't make trouble. The door opened before I could answer. The nurse who came in wore blue scrubs, white shoes, and a badge turned backward. Her hair was pulled tight enough to look like discipline. She carried a tablet in one hand and a paper cup of pills in the other. Robert, she said, we talked about visitors at rest time. Bob's hand moved on the chair arm. Not much. Enough. I'm Mike Mercer, I said. She looked at me the way people look at a loose rug. Carla Voss, I'm his nurse today. Today, I thought. That word matters in a place where nobody belongs long enough to be responsible. He's an old friend, Bob said. That's nice, Carla said, with the same tone a person uses for a magazine left in a waiting room. Robert gets overstimulated. Bob, I said. She blinked. Pardon? He goes by Bob. Carla smiled without moving her eyes. In the chart, he's Robert. In the room, he's Bob. Bob looked at me, and for 1 second the boy from shop class was back, the one who once dared me to touch a battery terminal with a wet screwdriver and then slapped my hand away before I proved I would. Carla handed him the pills. The water was still across the room. I waited. She waited. Bob looked at the pills in his palm. He'll need water, I said. He can ask. He shouldn't have to ask for the thing required to do what you asked him to do. Carla set the paper cup on the table and walked over to get the water. She did it quickly, efficiently, and with enough flatness to make clear that I had interrupted a system. That was all I needed to know for the first 10 minutes. Not everything. Enough. After she left, Bob closed his eyes. She's not bad, he said. I didn't say she was. She's busy. So was the man who put your call button behind the bed. His eyes opened. You saw that? Bob, I once watched you identify a vacuum leak by holding a cigar near a manifold. It was a cigarette. Carol made me quit saying cigarette in stories. It sounded trashier. He laughed then. A real one. Small, but his. The dogs heard it and relaxed. By lunch I had met Grant Delaney. Grant was the executive director, which meant his office had 2 chairs for families and none for residents. He wore a navy blazer in the Texas heat and had a handshake that arrived 1 second before the rest of him. Mr. Mercer, he said, Dana told us you might visit. We love involved friends. There are compliments that come wrapped around a warning. Bob and I go back a long way. Wonderful. Continuity is important during adjustment. Adjustment again. He gave me the tour, dining room, activity lounge, physical therapy space, courtyard, wall of photographs showing residents smiling at crafts I suspected some of them had not chosen. Bob seems a little unsettled, I said. Grant nodded with professional sadness. Transitions can be hard for men of his generation. Independence is an identity for them. When reality changes, there can be resistance. Reality or staffing? Grant's smile held. I understand that concern. But the hardest thing for men of your generation is accepting that your standards are no longer current. I stopped near the courtyard window. Outside, 2 residents sat in shade. One was asleep. The other was looking at a bird feeder with no seed in it. Current, I said. Care has changed, Grant said. Documentation, risk management, personalized support tiers. We can offer Bob more structure if the family approves an enhanced care level. More care costs more money. More support requires more resources. Does water within reach count as enhanced? Grant looked at me then. Not angry. Worse. Patient. Mr. Mercer, families sometimes interpret adjustment as neglect. It is understandable. It is also not always accurate. That is how polished men keep their hands clean. They make your eyes the problem. I went back to Bob's room and found Lucy sitting beside the bed rail, staring at the call button cord. "You've got an opinion?" I asked her. She looked at me as if I was late. The cord had been looped twice behind the rail. A person standing beside the bed could pull it loose in 3 seconds. A person lying in the bed with a bad right shoulder could not reach it without rolling farther than the rail allowed. I did not move it. That may sound cold. It wasn't. It was the first careful decision I made. If I fixed everything before Bob's children arrived, I would leave them only my word. And my word, to tired children receiving polished explanations, would become one more opinion. So I took notes, not dramatic notes, useful ones. 8:15. Water cup across room. 8:42. Call button clipped behind rail. 9:10. Hearing aid batteries dead. 9:36. Nurse uses Robert. Bob withdraws. 10:05. Bed alarm pad switched off at the wall. Sheet creases unchanged. I checked the bed, because machines tell the truth more often than people do. The alarm pad was under the sheet. The switch box was mounted low on the wall. The little red light was dark. I knelt slowly, because my knees have become negotiators, and I traced the cord with 2 fingers. No alarm. No record of movement except the record. The sheet under Bob's shoulder still carried the same pressure creases I had seen when I arrived. The whiteboard on the wall said repositioned at 9. No initials I could read. Just a check mark. I have never trusted a lonely check mark. Bob watched me from the chair. "Still fixing things?" he asked. "Still finding out who broke them?" I probably switched it off. From the chair, he looked away. "I'm just being difficult." I stood up too fast and felt it in my back. That irritated me, which was good. Irritation can keep grief from spilling over. "The Bob Fleur I knew," I said, "spent 3 hours in 105-degree heat helping a kid rebuild a carburetor because the boy was too embarrassed to ask his own father. You burned your thumb on the manifold, called him a mule, and gave him your last bottle of water." Bob stared at me. "Tommy Reyes," he said. "Blue Ford." "Green." It was blue. "You were colorblind when it came to other people's cars." He smiled. Then he reached toward the water, stopped, and let his hand fall. That was the measurement, not inches. Pride. The next time I pushed the call button, I started the timer on my watch. Bonnie sat at my feet. Lucy watched the door. 4 minutes. 7, 9. At 11 minutes and 20 seconds, a young aide came in wearing the expression of someone already apologizing. "Sorry," she said. "We were passing trays. What's your name?" "Kendra." "Kendra, how many rooms do you have right now?" She looked toward the hall before answering. "Too many." That was the most honest thing anyone at Prairie Vista had said. I thanked her. She blinked like thanks had become unfamiliar. Carla returned at lunch with no tray. "Robert didn't eat much again," she said, tapping on her tablet. Bob looked at me. I looked at the empty space where lunch was not. "The tray didn't come in," I said. Carla did not look up. "It was offered." I was here. Her finger paused. Now she looked up. "Excuse me?" I was sitting in that chair. No tray came in. For the first time, the room went quiet in a way that belonged to the staff, not Bob. Carla's jaw tightened. Sometimes residents forget. Sometimes visitors don't. Bob whispered, "Mike." There it was again. Fear trying to protect me from the place that held him. I let it rest. That night I stayed at a motel off I-40 with a carpet pattern designed to hide every mistake made since 1987. Bonnie and Lucy ate dinner from their travel bowls. Bonnie forgave the motel faster than Lucy did. I had meant to bring socks, a razor, dog food, and the folder Carol had made for traveling with the girls. Somehow, I had also packed one of Carol's illness notebooks. It was green cloth, soft at the corners from her hands. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The first pages were in her old handwriting, neat and firm. Questions for Tuesday appointment. Ask about nausea timing. Bring blue sweater. Infusion room cold. Later pages slanted. The letters got smaller, then larger, then careful in a way that made my throat close. If I ever stop sounding like myself, don't let them explain me away. I put the notebook down and covered my eyes. There are some instructions a dead woman leaves that are not meant to save you from sadness. They are meant to make you useful inside it. After a while, I opened the notebook again. Carol had written questions during the months when she needed help and hated needing it. When was I last outside? Who is checking what I cannot check? Where is the plan written? What changed after I became too tired to argue? Who benefits if the family stays tired? I copied those questions onto a yellow legal pad. Then I called Bob's children. Dana answered first from Dallas. I could hear hospital noise behind her, that soft machinery of urgency. "Mike, I appreciate you being there," she said. "But Dad has had a difficult transition. The staff warned us he might resist." "Dana," I said, "when you say staff, who do you mean?" "The care team." "Names." She paused. "Grant Delaney. Nurse Voss. I think a social worker." "You think?" Her voice sharpened. "I manage 3 departments, Mike. I'm doing my best." I know. That was true. People can be doing their best and still be wrong. Mark came on next from Lubbock, breathless, like he had stepped away from a job site. "Does he need more money in the account?" Dana said there's an upgraded care thing. "Maybe," I said. "But first we should know what we are buying. If paying more gets him more attention, I'll pay it. Attention that has to be purchased twice is not attention, it's a ransom." Mark said nothing. Shelley joined last from Oklahoma. I could hear a child in the background and dishes being moved. "I asked them last week if Dad was eating," she said before I could begin. "They said he was settling in." "Did you ask Bob?" Silence. Then quieter. "He told me he didn't want to be a bother." I looked at Carol's notebook. "That's not an answer either." Dana sighed. "Mike, what exactly are you saying?" So I stopped saying the place was wrong. I gave them the list. Times, objects, names, distances, contradictions, not feelings. Facts with shoes on. His water was across the room from the shoulder he can use. The call cord was behind the bed rail. The hearing aid batteries were dead in the case. The bed alarm pad was switched off while the whiteboard said he had been repositioned. Nurse Voss said he didn't eat much again. No lunch tray had entered the room. Nobody interrupted. That told me they were finally hearing me. "Can you send pictures?" Mark asked. "I can." "Then send them." "No," I said. Dana made a frustrated sound. "Mike, you need to come stand in the room." Shelley whispered, "All of us?" "All of you. That's not easy. Neither is becoming a man nobody believes." That was the hardest thing I said to them. I do not regret it. The next morning, I arrived before breakfast. Bob was in bed. The call button was still behind the rail. The water was still on the far table. His hearing aids were still in the drawer. I did not move them. He watched me notice. "You're mad," he said. "No." "You look mad." "That's just my face. Age settled there." He smiled, then winced as he shifted his shoulder. "They'll make it worse if you push." "Maybe. That's supposed to comfort me?" "No, it's supposed to be true." He looked toward the door. I keep introducing myself to the same people. I sat down beside him. "What do they say?" "They say, 'I know Robert.'" He closed his eyes. "I hate Robert." "I know. Do you?" "Banks and teachers." He opened his eyes then. It was a small thing, remembering what a man hates being called. Small things are where dignity hides when larger rooms are taken away. Dana arrived at 10:40 in a gray suit that had been folded into a suitcase and then punished for it. Mark came 20 minutes later in work boots clean enough to show he had tried. Shelley arrived last, hair pulled back, eyes red, carrying a tote bag with Bob's name written on masking tape. They met me in the parking lot because I wanted them to take one breath before Grant took 10. "This is not a courtroom," I said. Dana crossed her arms. "Then what is it?" "A room." Mark looked at the building. "That's it?" "That's enough if you look." Grant intercepted us in the lobby. Of course he did. "Dana," he said, warm as a brochure. "I wish you'd told me you were coming. We could have prepared." "That's why she didn't," I said. Grant turned to me slowly. "Mr. Mercer, surprise visits can create unnecessary stress for residents. So can thirst." Dana looked at me then, not approving, not yet, but listening. Grant offered a conference room. I declined. "Bob is in 118. Robert may be resting." Shelley said, "His name is Bob." It was the first brick out of the wall. In Bob's room, nobody spoke for several seconds. That was good. Silence gives facts room to stand up. Bob was in the recliner. His beard was worse than the day before. The water sat across the room. The call button was still behind the rail. The bed alarm light was still dark. Dana looked at the whiteboard. Mark looked at his father's face, and then at the floor. Shelley went to Bob first. "Dad?" Bob's eyes filled before hers did. "Hey, Shell." She knelt beside him. "Have you been eating?" He looked at Carla, who had appeared in the doorway as if summoned by liability. "I'm fine." "Dad?" He looked back at his daughter. "Not much." Mark's hands opened and closed. "Why didn't you tell us?" Bob gave him a tired smile. "You were busy." There are sentences children never recover from completely. Dana stepped toward the bed. "The resident care board says repositioned at 9. "Which resident?" I asked. She turned. "What?" "Which resident?" Her face tightened. "Dad." "Say it again." "Mike." "Say it again." Her eyes shone, angry and ashamed. "Dad." She hated me for it, but she said it. Carla cleared her throat. "Robert has refused several interventions." Shelley stood. "Bob." Carla's mouth thinned. "Bob can become agitated." I pointed to the call cord. "Would you ask him to pull that?" "Excuse me?" "Ask Bob to pull the call button from the bed." Grant had entered by then, quiet as a closing door. "Mr. Mercer, this is not productive. It is measurable. This is a care environment, not a workshop. Then stop making me find the broken parts." Dana looked from the call cord to Bob's shoulder. "Dad, can you reach it?" Bob tried. His hand trembled, reached, stopped short, and fell to the sheet. Mark turned away fast. "I thought paying more would fix it," he said. "No," Shelley said. One word, small enough to be heard. I moved to the wall and showed them the alarm switch. "Alarm pad is switched off," I said. "The board says repositioned. The sheet says no." Grant folded his hands. "Equipment can be adjusted. Then documentation should become honest." Dana looked at the whiteboard again. That was the moment I saw the administrator fight the daughter. The daughter won. "I authorized the enhanced support tier yesterday," she said. Grant nodded gently. A wise step. Dana took out her phone. Her hands shook enough that she had to tap twice. "I'm retracting it." Grant's face did not change. His temperature did. "I would caution against emotional decisions." Mark finally looked up. "You mean decisions made in person?" Grant turned to him. "Mr. Fleur, care transitions require patience. How much patience does a cup of water require?" Nobody answered that. Shelley put her hand on Bob's knee. "Dad," she said, "where do you want to spend your mornings?" Bob looked at the window. For a while I thought he would protect us from the answer. Then he said, "Not here. That settled it. Not legally. Not administratively. Humanly. Getting a man out of a place like that is not as simple as lifting him into a truck. There are medications, records, assessments, deposits, discharge papers, family arguments, and the strange machinery of people paid to move slowly when slow movement benefits them." Grant offered to meet in the conference room again. Dana said no. Mark asked for a list of charges. Shelley packed Bob's Western shirts, which were not in his closet but in a laundry cart 2 doors down, with another man's socks. I took Bonnie and Lucy outside and made calls from a bench near the empty bird feeder. Carol's notebook was open on my lap. I called 7 places. 2 had no availability. 1 sounded worse than Prairie Vista, but with better music on hold. 1 asked whether Bob was behavioral before asking his name. I crossed that one off hard enough to tear the paper. The 5th said they could review records in a week. The 6th told me to call back Monday. The 7th was Cottonwood Table Senior Community. A woman named Elise answered the phone herself. Not admissions. Not resident intake. Elise. I told her what Bob needed. She asked what Bob liked. That stopped me. Dominoes, I said. Bad coffee, Western shirts, telling stories in which he is always right. Elise laughed. We have 3 of those. Coffee's decent. He needs help with medication and mobility. He needs his hearing aids checked. He needs people to call him Bob. That last one is free. I looked across the courtyard at the bird feeder with no seed. Free things are often where you find out what a place believes. She was quiet for a second. Can you bring him by tomorrow? His children can. And the dogs? Bonnie looked up. They have representation. Cottonwood Table was not fancy. That was the first thing I liked about it. The building was brick, older, shaded by cottonwood trees that had earned their size. The front desk had a bowl of peppermints and a handwritten note that was unreadable from a distance, which suited me fine. The courtyard had raised beds with tomatoes tied to stakes. 2 men argued over dominoes under a fan. A woman in a turquoise sweater was watering basil while telling someone on the phone that she was too busy to be lonely. Elise met Bob at the door. You must be Bob. He looked at her, waited. No correction came. I am, he said. Good. We saved you a chair by the table. You can reject it after you inspect it. Bob glanced at me. Hear that? I said. A woman with terms. He almost smiled. Grant called while we were there. Dinah stepped outside to answer. Through the window, I watched her stand straighter than she had at Prairie Vista. When she came back, her face was pale. He says moving Dad during adjustment could be disruptive. What did you say? She looked at Bob. I said his name. That was enough. The move took 2 days. Not because Grant helped, because he did not. But families that have finally seen a thing can become difficult in useful ways. Dana handled records. Mark handled deposits and furniture. Shelley labeled clothes and sat with Bob while he chose which Western shirts made the trip. Carla did not say goodbye. I saw her once at the nurse's station, entering something on her tablet. Behind her, taped to a cabinet, was a small photograph of an older woman in a church dress. The photo had been turned toward the wall. I do not know why. I know only that people who turn away from tenderness usually started by turning away from their own. On Bob's last morning at Prairie Vista, Grant found me in the hallway. Mr. Mercer, he said, I hope the family understands the risks of disrupting his care plan. No, I said. I made it harder than you expected. You have an admirable loyalty to old standards. Water, names, buttons a man can reach. Those are not old standards. Grant's smile thinned. You may find as time goes on that independence is more complicated than you want it to be. Everything worth keeping is complicated. He looked toward Bob's room. Robert was safe here. I stepped closer. Not much. You keep mistaking old men for empty rooms. For once, Grant had no policy phrase ready. 3 days later, Bob sat under a cottonwood tree wearing a pearl snap shirt Shelley said had smelled like his cedar closet when she unpacked it. Bonnie slept near his left shoe. Lucy sat against his ankle, having decided he was under her supervision. The domino table was 12 feet away. "Hey, Bob," one of the men called. "Your play." Bob looked up like a man hearing a song he thought he had forgotten. His face changed slowly. Not younger. Present. He rested one hand on Lucy's head and said, without looking at me, "I was starting to think that was somebody else's name." I let the moment sit. Some truths deserve a chair. "No," I said. "That was always yours. They just stopped using it." He nodded once. The man at the domino table called again. "Bob, you coming or not?" Bob pushed himself up slowly. Mark started to help, then stopped when his father gave him a look. Shelley smiled through tears. Dana put one hand over her mouth and did not say, "Resident," not once. Bob took 3 careful steps toward the table. Nobody clapped. Bonnie followed because she believes all games involve snacks. Lucy stayed with me. Under the cottonwood, I watched my old friend argue over a domino he had probably played wrong on purpose, answering to his own name like a man who had just remembered it belonged